try to divide my comments. Let me just make sure that I'm on point here. I want to divide my comments into two sections. First, let me just point. I ended this morning's presentation by making reference to the year 1965 as an important year for transition, beginning of transition of the Muslim demographic in America. First, the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act 1965, then immigration reform 1965. Prior to 1965, the doors to America were always open for European people, for white folks coming from all over the world, and not so open for other people. But after the immigration law, just as right now, there's still a great deal of debate and contention around the immigration laws. But the people who would be kept out of the country without reformation of our current immigration laws are, again, black and brown people. You know, nobody coming from any place else in Europe have any trouble getting here. So this created a dynamic, as I said, of wherein millions of Muslims from other parts of the world, Muslims from Asia, all parts of Asia, Muslims from the so-called Middle East, Muslims from Africa, have now for decades been streaming into America and slowly shifting the Muslim demographic in America. What's also significant about the mid-1960s, and specifically the year 1965, is the fact that actually 1965 began with the assassination of Malcolm X. Malcolm X was martyred in February 1965. And there is a DePaul University scholar and author whose name is Amina Beverly McLeod. And Amina Beverly McLeod, and in her book, she demonstrates clearly that the growth of Islam in America amongst African Americans has a dividing line. And she says that the dividing line could be described as before Malcolm and after Malcolm, she says. And she shows how after the martyrdom of Al-Hajj Talib Malcolm X, that was commonly referred to as Sunni Islam. Islam according to the beliefs and practices of the globally dominant or prevalent Sunni order of Islam, exploded in the African American community after Al-Hajj Talib, that his own conversion from a version of Islam, as exemplified in the teachings of the Nation of Islam under Elijah Muhammad, to Sunni African Americans who then began to embrace Sunni Islam in great numbers. an important part of that dynamic is that 10 years after the martyrdom of Al-Hajj Shabazz Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad died. And he died in 1975. And when he died, his son, as a matter of fact, his seventh son out of many, whose name at that time was Wallace Muhammad, effectively became the leader of the Nation of Islam, succeeding his father. And he then proceeded to lead the majority body of the Nation of Islam from the teachings of his father and of the founder of the Nation of Islam, Farad Muhammad, to Sunni Islam. Imam Warithuddin Muhammad, God rest his soul, is provided the leadership for the largest mass conversion of Americans to Islam in American history, whereupon thousands and thousands of people, African Americans, who had been members of the Nation of Islam, all converted right into Sunni Islam almost overnight, following his leadership. Now also there was a breakaway group. Minister Farrakhan was part of that group. For a while he was known as Abdul Halim Farrakhan. And then he decided that he was going to re-embrace those Nation of Islam teachings. So he broke away from Imam Warithuddin Muhammad and reconstituted the Nation of Islam as we are familiar with it to this day. Now, as of 1965, this mass conversion takes place. And I mentioned that when I was growing up, when I'm growing up, primarily in the 1960s and 70s, me personally, our two greatest heroes were Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. And the face for a long time, the predominant face on Muslim Americans was the African-American face. I mean, if you just start thinking back to that period of time and all of the notable conversions of African-American athletes, African-American musicians, African-Americans, African-American celebrities, all of whom became Muslim. Even from the Civil Rights era, the four North Carolina A&T college students who began the sit-in movement at the Woolworth lunch counter. One of those four students, his name was Ezel Blair. Ezel Blair became Muslim in 1971. That's the only maybe 7 years after the sit-in at Woolworth. So this rapid growth of Islam in America and Islam with as I said, with an African-American face became well known and common. Muhammad Ali's great victory in the Supreme Court that enabled him to not just to keep from going to prison for resisting the war, but open the door for a recognition for the Islamic faith. The 8-0 victory in the Supreme Court for Ali. The judges, the Supreme Court, eventually affirmed Ali's position, which was that he was a Muslim. And as a Muslim, you should read you can go online and read the whole brief. He said, the only lawful combat for me is a jihad. This is what he said, which would be equivalent to what's known as a just war. And the war in Vietnam is not that, so I'm not going. and that was upheld by the court. I don't know if you could get away with that now, but he got away with it, and in so doing, reaffirmed a fundamental American principle. So now, very quickly, even as the demographic continued to grow, the prominence of the African American Muslim in the total spectrum of various Muslim ethnic groups here in America, as I said, Muslims from Europe, Muslims from so-called Middle East, etc., continue up until 9/11. When 9/11 happened, there was a dramatic shift in public perception that rendered African Americans effectively invisible, like Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man. All of a sudden, after 9/11 and the shift in American foreign policy and conflicts breaking out all over the world, you stopped seeing African American Muslim experts on television talking about situations. You stopped hearing from African American Muslims. People in the public perception, from the White House down, the perception was that the real Muslims, the authentic Muslims, are Muslims who are Arabs, or Muslims from Southern Asia, any place other than African American. And so that's on one hand. On the other hand, 9/11 resulted, as Dr. Sherman Jackson points out, 9/11 resulted in a revoking of the artificial white privilege of Muslim ethnic groups of color. I hope you heard what I said. See, prior to 9/11, the nature of assimilation is to become part of whatever's going on. And when Muslims were migrating to America in great numbers, they were migrating to assimilate into white America, not black America. Their whole concept of being successful as a Muslim in America was to be successful as a Muslim in white America. And therefore they began to enjoy a sort of artificial white privilege that was revoked when 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, white America began to treat Muslim people of colors as the new nigger on the block. They even began calling them that. As American troops started going overseas and going into Iraq and Afghanistan, their same old American racism reared its ugly head, and they began calling Arabs and other people sand niggers, towel head wearing niggers, and all of this kind of thing. Same old American racism. And and so now here we are. We're 14 years now past 9/11, and there's been a lot of healing that has taken place, but a lot of healing that has not taken place as well. And right now, across the country, I, as a vice president of a national Muslim organization that's primarily African American, we constantly receive reports of tension in Muslim communities across the country between what we call indigenous, that is to say non-immigrant Muslims, and immigrant Muslims. It's a great deal of tension wherever you have mixed, and that includes even right here in New York City. So this is very much prevalent in the older generation of Muslim immigrants, and a lot less prevalent in their sons and daughters who are born and raised in America, their sons and daughters who are part of the hip-hop generation, their sons and daughters who look up to African American Muslim leadership, etc. And even for leaders like myself, it's my 26th year as the Imam of the Muslim Islamic Brotherhood. And I've been in Muslim really my entire adult life as a Muslim, which is 40 some odd years now. And for leaders like myself, the hope for a more, for a Muslim version of the beloved community lies more with the younger generation of multi-ethnic generation of Muslims than with their parents or their grandparents, who have other priorities. They're not concerned about Black Lives Matter for the most part. They're concerned about what's going on in the country of their origin. Their sons and daughters say, well, you know, I respect, but that ain't my country. I wasn't born in Iraq. I wasn't born here, even though I have concern. So this brings me, lastly, this brings me to 2015. And 2015 as what we in the movement are referring to as the year of 5090. We refer to 2015 as 5090 because it's 50 years since the martyrdom of Al-Hajj Talib Malcolm X, and 90 because if he were still alive, next month he would be 90 years old. And that sounds strange to us because we're only used to Malcolm and Martin as young men, because they were young men. Neither one of them lived to be 40 years old. Malcolm was 3 years older than Martin, and he was killed at 39, and Martin was killed 3 years later at 39. So this is a very important year because various unresolved issues and problems around race still endure in America 50 years after the time of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and of Hajj Malik el-Shabazz Malcolm X. But there is, right now, at this very moment, there is a resurgence of interest in Malcolm X amongst Muslim youth of different ethnicities that's occurring across the country. And I talked to them. Why are you all so interested in Malcolm? You weren't even born when he was around. And they say, because when we go on YouTube and when we look at social media and we're looking at his the videos of his speeches, he's speaking to us right now. This is what they say. And what he's saying, what he was saying 50 years ago, is more relevant to what we're going through now as Americans than most of the imams who are talking right now in the present. This is what the young people are saying. The young people are criticizing their imams. They're saying they're not connected to social justice issues. And social justice issues are prophetic in nature. This is how the younger generation is thinking and feeling at this moment. So as we wrestle with this issue today, allow your Muslim brother who sits before you to remind you that Professor James Cone, who Father Gregory talked about at length, Professor James Cone always says, and we call him the father of Black theology, and he always says it was Malcolm X that served as a catalyst in his mind, which led to the formation of Black theology. Professor Cone says it was Malcolm X's critique of white supremacy and white supremacy's impact on religion and white supremacy's impact on education and white supremacy's impact on life in America, Professor Cone says, that caused him to question himself and then to critique the society and to embrace not only the concept of the American dream, as Dr. King so eloquently articulated, but also the reality of the American nightmare, as Malcolm X so eloquently articulated. So once again, we thank Almighty God. We thank Almighty Allah for having sent both of these men, Dr. King and Malcolm X, to us. I bet you never thought there would be a president in the White House who mentions both of those men. Not even Bill Clinton did that one. But those are the times that we are living in, and we thank Almighty God for that.
What I'd like to do are two things, and we have about half hour